Author and journalist Yossi Klein-Halevi told IBA's Eli Wogelanter that this conflict is unlike any other in Israel's history, in part because of the new generation that's fighting it, as well as the unity among the Israeli public in understanding what the conflict is about.
Well, domestically, I can't recall another war that has enjoyed such widespread support among Jewish Israelis, and one has to emphasize Jewish Israelis because among Arab Israelis the sentiment is very different. But among the Jewish population in Israel, 95% support for the government and the army in this war. Now, that's extraordinary, and it may well be unprecedented since the Yom Kippur War of 1973. I moved to Israel from the United States in 1982, summer of 1982, beginning of the first Lebanon War. Israelis were shouting, literally shouting at each other on the streets about the war. The war was tearing the society apart. What we learned as a result of the 1982 war was that the only way we could go to war again is if we had national unity. 1982 was a watershed in teaching the Israeli political system how to go to war and how not to go to war, especially when you're dealing with asymmetrical war, which isolates Israel internationally. I just completed a book that deals with the left-right schism over a period of roughly 40 years, going back to the post-1967 war. And when I think back over the story that that book tells, we are in a completely different Israel. The story that my book tells is history. It is not relevant to Israel today. So something profound has changed. Look, when you have a war in which Amos Oz on the one hand and Avigdor Lieberman on the other both agree must be fought, and both agree is more or less, certainly is a just war, and more or less needs to be fought the way it has been fought, then you realize we're in a completely different Israel.
Is it a matter of a new generation coming of age, or is it a new reality in the world that we're suddenly seeing in a different way?
Well, I think it's both. The generation that is coming of age today, the generation that's fighting this war, came of age during the Second Intifada in the early 2000s. And as opposed to my generation, which really came of age during the First Lebanon War and the First Intifada, this generation inherited an Israel that had tried to make peace with the Palestinians and that had received 4 years of suicide bombings in response. That was a shattering moment. And what the Second Intifada did, and people abroad don't understand just how transformative the Second Intifada was for Israeli consciousness. They tend to think of it as one more episode in an ongoing and endless conflict. The Second Intifada was a watershed. First of all, it shattered the Israeli left, and it shattered the camp that I would call the guilty Israelis. And I was part of that camp.
What is that camp?
The camp was of those who felt that we had never offered the Palestinians a serious deal, that all we had offered the Palestinians was the stick and not the carrot. And after the Second Intifada, which was preceded by Israel's acceptance of a two-state solution and the redivision of Jerusalem, those 4 years of suicide bombings shattered transformed the Israeli public. Now let's look for a moment at what has happened here since the year 2000. And this, I think, is also not sufficiently understood abroad. We have been in one long, ongoing war since the year 2000 that has been punctuated by long ceasefires. I would define that as a war against the Israeli home front. It began with those 4 years of suicide bombings, 2000 to 2004. Then in 2006, Hezbollah's missile attacks on the home front on the Galilee. And over the last 10 years, ongoing rocket attacks from Hamas on our communities in the south. The cumulative message to the Israeli public is that this is not a war of choice. in the way that the Lebanon War of 1982 was perceived by many people in this country as a war we could have avoided. Israelis today, Israeli Jews, are virtually unanimous in agreeing this is an unavoidable war.
Several European nations